Chicken eyesight is a really interesting subject. And as backyard poultry owners, it's important to understand how chicken vision works. Drew Barbas down in the Philippines recently contacted me to do a video for his upcoming poultry conference, so I figured I'd take this opportunity to discuss a little bit of lighting and behavior in chickens. And on this episode of Chicken Shorts, we will be going over how to see the world through the eyes of a chicken. So as you might expect, chicken vision is extremely important to the survival of the birds. They are a prey animal, and so they evolved to have eyesight that they can detect predators with. They also use it to find their food, but they have very, very exceptionally good vision. So, looking at a chicken, you can see, there's his eye. It's actually much larger than that. The majority of the space inside the head of a chicken is actually dedicated to vision. The eyes are actually about the size of blueberries. So while you see this little beady bit sticking out, the eyeball fills up that whole big area inside there. And then a good portion of the brain is dedicated to decoding that imagery. So they're able to see really well and process that images that they see at a very high rate. They can see motion much better than us humans can. And due to the structure of their eyes, they are able to see a wider frequency range, more wavelengths of light than humans are able to as well. Let me set him down real quick. So to understand what I'm going to be talking about with the chicken vision, we need to go over a little bit about what actually some of the terminology is. So wavelength and the visual spectrum. What exactly is light? Light is what we see, everything around us. But on a more technical aspect of it, it's simply the visual part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we're able to see. So if you look at spectrum here, you can see that this is just a little segment. On either side of our visual sector here, we have radio waves and we have microwaves and we have gamma rays and all that other stuff. Radio waves are exactly the same thing as visible light, just at a different frequency, different wavelength. Visible light for humans is usually around 390 nanometers to 700 nanometers in wavelength, so a very tiny little spectrum. Chickens, however, they can see down to about 350 nanometers to 700 nanometers. They have about 40 extra nanometers of reception in their eyes, so they can see a wider frequency than we can. They can see more of that light. And what they gain in that little bit of spectrum is ultraviolet light. We can't see ultraviolet light, chickens can. So when you're looking at chicken vision, you need to take this entire spectrum into account. You can't just take a white light that looks white to us and expect it to look white for a chicken, because they have all that extra vision in there. So if you look at some images that are taken in false color, you can see that these were taken using a ultraviolet camera. So it was able to pick up that ultraviolet frequency, ultraviolet wavelengths, and upscale it into false color, basically. You shift that point, that data, into our visible spectrum, so you can see all that extra stuff that comes out in there. In addition to this extra spectrum that they can see, they also have a much better visual sensitivity, even in the same colors that we're able to see. So our eyesight is based on somewhat of a bell curve. We have a little bit of visual sensitivity down in the blue, then it curves up into the green. Our peak visual sensitivity is up here in the green, and then drops back down into the red, so we don't see red all that well. Chickens, on the other hand, have 4 different peaks in their visual sensitivity. They have a little peak in the ultraviolet, they have a little peak in the blue, big peak in the green, and a peak in the red. So they see the contrast between all those different colors much better than we do. So here's a little bit of an example. I have 2 high-powered lasers here. One is green, the other is red. Notice how the green looks brighter. Hopefully it'll come across on camera, but in person the green definitely looks brighter, and on camera it should as well. the difference between these two lasers, the red one is outputting 200 milliwatts, while the green one is only putting out 100 milliwatts. So the red laser is twice as powerful as the green, but due to our visual sensitivity, we see that green as being much brighter than the red. A chicken looking at those same things would probably see the red just as bright, or maybe even brighter, than the green, because it's outputting more power. Our eyes just aren't tuned to it as much, so we don't interpret it as being as bright. Same thing for blue and ultraviolet. Chickens are able to see all that much better than we are. And ultraviolet, especially, we don't see at all. There's been a few rare cases of people that can see it, but even then it's very, very minimal. Chickens and many other birds can actually look up into the sky and are possibly able to see the ultraviolet patterns going through the sky and be able to orient themselves in north, south, east, west direction based on just being able to see that. Also on black birds and, well, any kind of bird, but especially on birds that look completely black to us, they may have many intricate patterns in the ultraviolet spectrum that we simply are not able to see, but the birds are able to see that. And because it's such a big part of their vision, when you're putting light in your chicken coop, you need to make sure that there is some sort of ultraviolet light. You also need to be very careful with your different light sources. Now, of course, the best light for your chickens is the sun. It's what they're tuned to, it's what their eyes are best used under. Sunlight provides the best spectrum by far for your chickens. So free range them whenever you can. Getting your chickens outside in that great sunlight. It's got all the ultraviolet they need to see. It's got every other spectrum in there in a nice smooth bell curve pattern. It is ideal for your chickens, so free range them as often as you can. But the sun does have one major downside, and that is it's really hard to control the day length. You can't just turn a little dial and have the sun stay up longer. It's a natural cycle. And due to that natural cycle, that is what the chickens, again, are used to being under. So when the day length starts getting shorter, the chickens slow down their laying. They produce less eggs, they shut down for the winter time. We, however, often want our chickens to lay year-round. We want them laying through the winter time, we want them laying through the spring, the summer, all the time. So to be able to get that, you have to be able to control that day length. When the day length starts getting shorter, you can add artificial lighting to your flock. And as you increase that artificial lighting, you get a steady, constant day length, which will keep your chickens laying. Or if your chickens have already stopped laying, you can step the day length up, artificially increasing the day length, and when the day length increases, it stimulates chickens to start laying again. But there's quite a few different lighting options out there. So what is best for your chickens? Now, the traditional one is the incandescent bulb. This is the old style, very inefficient, but it works fairly well. It has a decent spectrum, but it puts out not a perfect bell curve like the sun. These put out a lot of heat and a lot of infrared radiation. So what that means is if you look at a spectrograph image of this light, it has a very steep curve to it. It's barely even a curve. It's just a line up from blue to red. And that continues on into the infrared, which makes it inefficient. So it looks white to us, but to the chickens, there's a lot more red in there, so they will be seeing a lot more red coming out of their light. It'll be more biased towards the red as far as the chicken can see it. Not necessarily a bad thing. It can, in some cases, help reduce a little bit of picking, but it's not ideal either. It sometimes also increases the stress of the chicken. But one of the major benefits as well of this type of light is it doesn't flicker. It has a hot element in there, it's running electricity through there. Even if the power grid is flickering, which here in the United States it's 60 hertz, so you'll have a 60 hertz flicker in your power grid, it doesn't have enough time to cool off between those really fast pulses of electricity, so you have a steady, constant light. Which brings us to the next option, the fluorescent light bulb. In this case, this is a compact fluorescent light bulb, a little curly-Q light bulb. These are very efficient and they got very popular over the last few years because they last longer and they use a lot less electricity and they put out a lot less heat. However, the problem with these comes when you look at their spectrum. Now, this is completely different to what any kind of normal lighting should look. This was made for us. It's made for humans. It has all those little peaks in there, and our eyes put that together as white light. Chickens, with their completely different visual sensitivity, will not see it that way. And another downside to the fluorescent bulbs that can even impact humans is they flicker. They don't hold their light on constantly, and if you get that 60 hertz or 50 hertz flicker in your electric power grid, that comes through in the light. And with chickens' ability to see motion much better than humans, that is something that really, really affects them. I've seen this firsthand. Walk in a chicken coop, a big commercial chicken coop, where the only light they've had is compact fluorescent light bulbs, and they are extremely stressed out. They're flying everywhere, they're panicking. This is not a good environment for the chickens. So unless you have no other option, avoid the fluorescent light bulbs in your chicken coop. They may be efficient, but if this is the only other option, go ahead and use the older style incandescent light bulbs. It'll be a much better environment for your chickens. Now, thankfully, we have something better on the scene. We have LEDs, light emitting diodes. This is the newest technology. It's starting to spread a lot more, which is great. It's becoming more readily available. Still a little bit more expensive than some of the other light bulbs, but much higher quality, and you get a much better spectrum out of these. The thing about LEDs is that spectrum on them can be tuned. So you can have a whole variety of spectrums in here. Different types of LED bulbs tuned for different purposes. These here are made for chickens. You can get others that are just general LEDs, and they'll probably have a decent spectrum as well. But if you want to get the best ones, you can buy them specifically tuned for chickens. They're even working on ones that output the proper amount of ultraviolet light as well. So, not perfectly ideal yet. There's still some weird little peaks in blue that are just part of the LED technology, but that'll be ironed out, and it may actually be by the time this video comes out that they've worked all that through. In the same research project that I mentioned with the CFLs, where I walked in the commercial house and there were just tons of panicking chickens, the next house over was running LED bulbs. And I walked in that house, the chickens kind of looked up at me, shuffled a few feet off to the side, and continued going about their business. They're very free of fear, free of stress, so LED bulbs have a marked difference, very noticeable difference between LEDs and CFLs. Maybe not quite as big of a difference between them and the older incandescent style as far as behavior goes, but then you're getting into money savings and you get cheaper electricity when you're using the LEDs, and they'll last a lot longer. LEDs usually don't flicker as well. Just make sure you have good quality LEDs on them. So some of the effects out of that study was that LEDs decrease the stress susceptibility in chickens, make them less fearful, and sort of as a result of that, it increases their immune response. They have a much better immune system when they're under that LED light in the study that I performed up at A&M. This is probably due to them being less stressed under that much better spectrum of light. So a little bit closer look here. This is an actual LED bulb that I used in some of my research studies. If it will focus on the bulb, there we go. This is an overdrive bulb. The end has been cracked open, and you can see how it works. It has all these little LED cobs in there. Electricity goes to those, they all light up, and you have some nice bright light. So with that new technology in there, it can be programmed and tuned to have different colors. The one thing I will be sure to warn you of, don't use the color-changing party LED bulbs. Those things have flicker. Those things are usually several different color LEDs kind of mixed together that have the same effect as the fluorescent light bulbs. They mix together to be white for our eyes, but they don't really work all that well for the chickens. Get something specifically made for chickens, because LEDs do still get hot, and it's good to have proper cooling on them as well. They'll have little heat sinks on them, so it'll be able to get rid of that heat, especially if they get a little bit of dust on them. You don't want them to overheat and die and you lose your new expensive LED bulb. So get a good quality LED, and it works really, really well for your chickens. Now, how do you get the correct photo period for your chickens? You can use a very simple timer. You get a little electrical timer and set it to go on a little bit after sunset and come on a little bit before sunrise. And then you'll want to gradually increment the light out to approximately 17 hours a day. The goal here is to have your light on just longer than the longest day of the year. So what you do is you have your normal day length, and then you add 15 minutes in the evening, then wait a few days, add 15 minutes in the morning, and kind of do that, alternating it back and forth, 15 minutes in the evening, 15 minutes in the morning, until you get out to your 17-hour-ish period of light. It depends on what part of the world you're in, how long your longest day is. You can vary that a little bit, but just make sure that they have constant day length. Then once you get out here, you'll see that this middle natural lighting period will get longer and shorter as the year goes on, but with your LED lighting as a supplement, it will never change the day length that the chickens actually see. And that will keep them laying year-round. That incremental going up will stimulate them to lay, and the day length staying constant year-round will keep them laying and producing for as long as you want them to. Very simple to do. Now, having the proper light intensity is also important. You want to have somewhere between 5 to 100 lux at the level of the chicken when they're sitting in their coop at night. Now, not everyone has a nice fancy light meter that they can go out. Sometimes you can get apps on your phone. They don't always work all that well. But when you're looking at the light, you'll want to get about a 40 to 60 watt equivalent, incandescent equivalent. You'll see that on a lot of the LED lights. Or you want about 450 to 800 lumens. Once you get over 1600, which I think this one is, yeah, this is a 1600 lumen bulb, a 100 watt equivalent LED bulb, if you look at the packaging. That gets a little bit bright, it's a little bit overkill. This shouldn't be too bad, this will be about on the upper level that you want, but if you start getting much brighter than that, you start affecting the chickens negatively, and if the light is too bright, they can start feather picking. It can cause them to peck each other a little bit. So if you start seeing that, especially in the evenings or the mornings when they're only under their artificial light, maybe get a lower intensity light. Now, if you don't have a light meter, a very simple way to measure this, put the light in your chicken coop, come out at night when it's on, stand in the middle of the coop, or the approximate areas that the chickens usually stand in, and look at the ground. If you can see detail on the floor, it's bright enough. It doesn't have to be a really bright light. If you can't see any detail on the floor, that's a bit too dim, but as long as you can see a little bit of detail on the floor, that's bright enough to light stimulate the chickens. Like I said, they're very, very sensitive when it comes to their photoperiods and being able to detect that light and react to it. So you don't need to put a super bright light in your coop, and it's actually better to have a lower intensity light. It saves electricity, and it keeps your chickens calm and not pecking at each other, which is something you don't really want. Now, lighting in the chicken coop isn't the only way you can improve your chicken's quality of life by adding light. You can also put light in your incubators. Believe it or not, it actually improves the development of the chick to have light in your incubators. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it in a natural perspective. When a wild bird is out there, light shines on the eggs during the day when the mother bird leaves the nest, and it gets dark at night and there's no light shining on the eggs at night. So they have that day-night cycle, and it sets their internal clocks in their brain before they even hatch out, so they get their natural circadian rhythms going. With chickens, it's no different. If you put them in a completely dark incubator, they have nothing to judge their day-night cycle on, and they just hatch out whenever, and they may not be all the best quality chicks. It works, it's been working that way for many years, but you can improve it by adding some very simple technology, LED strip lights. Now these, let's see if we can get a close-up view of these, are very small LEDs stuck on a long strip. They'll all light up. You just run 12 volts through it, and you can see all these little LEDs on there shine nice and bright. If you're getting these, you want to make sure that you get the kind that have this rubberized coating on them. It makes them waterproof. You don't want to have non-waterproof LEDs in your incubator. That's just a recipe for disaster. It might require a little bit of soldering. You can see the little contacts there. Just make sure you put some silicone goop on there afterwards to waterproof that up as well. And you can just stick these right inside your incubator, and it will help get your chicken's circadian rhythm set. It's very simple. You don't have to have any difficult, intricate programming knowledge, just 12 hours on, 12 hours off every day. Have that cycle, put it on a timer, and it works really well. These usually run off of 12 volts, so you'll have to get a little transformer, but most of the LED strip lights these days come with that pre-installed, just a little box you plug them into. Really simple, just stick them inside your incubator. There's been a little bit of variation depending on the color of the eggs, but for the most part you'll see an increase in chick quality. You'll have better quality chicks coming out of your eggs, and you'll have a more synced up hatch. Instead of chicks just randomly hatching over a 24-hour period, you'll get them all hatching out within a few hours of each other for the most part. At least when I did my study up at A&M in the great big incubators, we saw that data, and you can actually see the charts here that we managed to make out of all that interesting data from doing research up at A&M with all the incubators and hundreds of eggs. Now, I want to stress that this is not a miracle cure. You can't just slam some LEDs inside your incubator and expect a magical 100% hatch rate no matter what you do. This is once you get your incubators tuned to working really, really well, this can add an extra few percentage points onto your hatch. You might get a little bit better quality chicks coming out of there. You might get even a few more chicks hatching out of there because they're able to survive a little bit longer. We're still not sure of the mechanism there, but we saw a 1% increase in actual number of viable chicks that hatched out, and it was a statistically significant number, 1%. So it's not a huge deal if you're still tuning all, getting the correct temperature, getting the correct humidity in your incubator, but once you've gotten that set, you can put some of these in there and increase your hatch rate. And it does work really well, and it's starting to be implemented in some of the larger poultry industries out there as well. So I hope you found this enlightening, and that it might have opened your eyes to a whole spectrum of possibilities out there for dealing with chicken vision. It's definitely something to crow about. So, if you have any questions, you can contact me at huthavian.com. Always happy to answer any chicken questions, not just regarding lighting. But hope you have a great day, and as always,